I am Mara. The invite called it a Calder family tribute in a leafy garden outside Valencia. The garden had been staged like a magazine spread, pale linens, citrus blossoms, and candles glowing in amber glass. Every corner whispered of perfection, the kind of aesthetic my family prized more than truth. I arrived in a linen dress that brushed my ankles, carrying a bottle of Verdejo no one would open. The invitation had said tribute, but I knew better. Nothing in my family ever came without a transaction hidden beneath the toast. Elise met me first, floating toward me in cream silk, the kind that announces comfort born of cruelty. Her hug was a performance, a kiss that missed my cheek and landed on the air beside it. "You look well," she said, meaning you look older. I smiled because it was easier. The Calder women are trained early in the art of smiling through decay. The table stretched beneath a canopy of olive branches. My father stood at its head, laughing too loudly, that brittle sound he makes when he's waiting for approval. My mother, Beatrice, was already on her third glass of champagne. The way she held it, stem pinched, wrist limp, reminded me of every Sunday dinner where her praise came only through others. "Your sister looks radiant tonight. Elise, your skin glows." I had learned, long ago, that my worth was measured in silence. When Elise clinked her glass, a hush fell over the crowd. The sun dipped lower, brushing everything in that honeyed light that photographers call golden hour. I remember thinking how beautiful cruelty can look when it's well lit. My father stepped forward, straight-backed in his navy suit, the air heavy with cologne and control. "Give us the cottage," he barked. "You have no children." The words landed like glass shattering across the table. For a heartbeat, even the cicadas seemed to still. The guests blinked, unsure whether to laugh or look away. I stood there, hand steady, the stem of my glass cold against my palm. Inside me, something ancient, older than grief, older than rage, uncurled and went very still. My mother's voice followed, soft and surgical. "You heard your father. You're a barren waste, Mara. Let the home belong to someone who will fill it." Her smile stayed painted in place, polite as ever, the same expression she used at charity galas. 70 faces around us pretended this was manners, the polite murder of dignity disguised as family conversation. They looked down at their plates or at the horizon, unwilling to see what was being done in plain daylight. I did not answer. There was nothing left to defend. My infertility, my independence, my refusal to play their endless game of inheritance and appearance, all of it had already been cross-examined in whispers. I knew the story they told about me. The lonely sister, the difficult daughter, the woman who chose her own peace and therefore forfeited her place at the table. The slap came next. It was quick, clean, and echoing, the kind of gesture my mother would later deny. Her ring caught the edge of my lip. The pain was brief but bright, like static under the skin. And then, absurdly, applause. Elise started it, leading the rhythm with the same hands that had once braided my hair when we were girls. The crowd followed, uncertain but obedient, clapping to drown out their discomfort. It was the sound of loyalty rehearsed, not felt. In that moment, I saw the entire Calder legacy for what it truly was, a lineage of beautiful veneers held together by fear. I did not cry. Not because I was strong, but because tears would have confirmed their narrative, the fragile woman, undone by emotion. Instead, I turned. The gravel path crunched beneath my heels as I walked toward the car. Behind me, laughter resumed, brittle and relieved, like the aftermath of a storm that had passed over someone else's house. When I reached the car, the sky was bruised with twilight. I sat inside, closed the door, and felt the silence wrap around me. My reflection in the window was steady, though the welt on my cheek had begun to bloom. I pressed one contact on my phone, the only one I trusted, and said, "Record this." It was not a plea. It was the beginning of a reckoning. As the line connected, I watched the lights of the garden flicker in the distance. My family still gathered beneath their golden canopy, unaware that their performance had finally reached its last act. I could hear faint echoes of music, of Elise's laugh, of my father's toast. The same voices that had spent years deciding who I should be now faded behind glass. I sat there for a long time, breathing through the sting, tracing the edge of control in the rhythm of my pulse. The night air smelled of rosemary and smoke. I remember thinking that even ashes have their use. In that car, something shifted. Not anger, that had burned away years ago. What came instead was a cold clarity, precise and patient. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't plead. It builds like dawn. They had wanted a tribute. They would get one. Not carved in speeches or framed in photographs, but in records, deeds, and truths that no applause could erase. And as the first stars appeared above the Valencia hills, I started the engine. The garden lights vanished in the rearview mirror, swallowed by distance. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet not as exile, but as return. The night after the tribute, I did not sleep. The slap still echoed in the space behind my ears, not as pain, but as confirmation. It was the sound of their certainty, the belief that I would always take it, the quiet daughter who tidied her own wounds and called it peace. I sat at the small table in my hotel room, the lamp low, my laptop open, and began the work of dismantling them piece by piece. There is something strangely methodical about betrayal. It leaves a trail, in signatures, transfers, and half-forgotten emails. I started with the Cottage papers. My father's demand had not come from impulse. It was premeditated. He had already tried to shift ownership, the kind of maneuver he assumed I would never catch. But I kept records. I always had. Years ago, when I first bought the cottage outside Porto with the inheritance my grandmother left me, I had learned that sentiment and safety do not coexist in families like ours. I kept every invoice, every receipt, every notarized document. I archived emails in triple copies. I had a paper trail, so long it could bury lies. By dawn, I had everything in motion. My solicitor, Agnes, answered my call before her coffee. She had represented me for years, a quiet woman with a mind like steel wire. When I told her what had happened, she didn't gasp or sympathize. She just said, "Send me everything. And Mara, keep your tone neutral when they reach out." I forwarded the deed scans, the archive transfers, and a folder of correspondence showing the gradual pattern of my father's interference. The forged ownership change came to light almost immediately, a voicemail from a bank clerk who had the decency to question why my mother's signature appeared on a property that wasn't hers. "Looks like they were trying to push it through quietly," he said in the recording. His tone was apologetic, almost embarrassed. "But the dates don't align. Someone rushed it." I listened twice, then saved the file. Evidence, not speeches. I repeated that to myself as I worked, a mantra, a shield. At mid-morning, I added the final piece, the video from a neighbor who had filmed the slap. He lived 2 houses away from the venue and often recorded the events for his travel blog. When I messaged him, he replied within minutes. "You mean that part after the toast?" he asked. "Yeah, I thought that was strange." He sent me the file, without hesitation. The clip was under 10 seconds long. My mother's hand, the sound of contact, and then the applause. Watching it detached from the night's glamour stripped it of pretense. It wasn't a family moment anymore. It was evidence. The applause didn't sound celebratory. It sounded feral. By the time I sent the compilation to Agnes, the sun was already climbing. I hadn't eaten. My lip was swollen, my throat raw from holding back everything that once begged to be said. But there was clarity now, clean and sharp. When people talk about revenge, they picture fire. I felt ice, slow, deliberate, exacting. I wasn't going to scream into the void. I was going to document. At noon, I drove back into Valencia. My family was hosting a luncheon for the same guests, a continuation of their self-portrait, the perfect Calders celebrating legacy. The irony was almost artistic. I sat in a small cafe across from the garden venue, laptop open, latte untouched, and watched them through the glass walls. Elise was radiant again, dressed in white, hair coiled like she'd stepped out of an advert. My father was back to shaking hands, charming the donors who believed in his charities. My mother, in pale blue silk, pretended her face hadn't twisted in violence 20 hours earlier. At lunch, their performance continued. Elise posed by a banner about legacy, while a €14,300 line of credit in my mother's name blinked on my screen. The number glowed softly, proof of how deep their entitlement ran. The credit was taken using the cottage as collateral. My cottage. My signature forged. I didn't feel anger this time, just certainty. They had built their world on the assumption that I would never contest it, that I would always absorb the damage for the sake of peace. But peace without boundaries is just silence, and silence is what had made them bold. From my seat in the cafe, I opened 3 tabs. The first was the online report system for financial exploitation. The second was the bank's fraud division portal. The third was my secure cloud folder, where every piece of evidence was uploading automatically. As the files transferred, I looked up at them again, my family framed by glass and greenery, rehearsing affection for the world. The same gestures, the same laugh lines, the same careful choreography. I wondered if they ever saw the hollowness of it. They had no idea I was sitting across the street, watching their empire of charm dissolve in real time. I thought about the years leading up to this, the inheritance advice, the subtle reshuffling of accounts, the way they would tell me, "You don't need to worry about the paperwork, darling. We've got it handled." Every phrase had been a small theft dressed as care. And every time I'd nodded, believing that love could be negotiated. Now, watching them through the glass, I understood how wrong that was. Love doesn't demand surrender as proof. Love doesn't silence the one who remembers. When the uploads finished, I checked the timestamp. 1:07 p.m. The cafe had filled with the sound of cutlery and low chatter. My coffee had gone cold. I sent one final message to Agnes. All documents uploaded. Proceed as you see fit. Her reply came almost instantly. Understood. I'll file before end of day. Do not contact them directly. I smiled at that. It was advice I intended to follow. There was no need for confrontation anymore. I didn't want apologies. I wanted accountability, the kind that leaves a record. Outside, Elise raised her glass again, posing for another photo. The banner behind her read the Calder legacy, built to last. The irony nearly made me laugh. Legacies built on theft rarely do. I packed my laptop, paid for my coffee, and stepped out into the sunlight. The warmth on my skin felt different now, not as a balm, but as confirmation. I walked past the garden without slowing. From within, I heard the hum of conversation, the clink of crystal, the practiced laughter of people who believed they had won. They didn't know that the story had already shifted hands. The evidence existed. It would speak without me. For years I had been edited out of their narrative, the daughter who was too quiet, too distant, too childless to matter. But evidence doesn't need permission to be believed. It only needs to exist. And now it did. That afternoon, as I drove back to my hotel, the sky over Valencia glowed, white with heat. My phone vibrated with notifications, confirmations of receipt, uploads complete, a message from Agnes, marked secured. Each vibration felt like a heartbeat I had once muted finally finding rhythm again. I didn't think of the slap anymore. I thought of the files. I thought of the paper trail that would outlast their charm. Evidence, not speeches. That was how the story of the Calder family would finally be told. There is a specific stillness that comes before justice begins to move, a silence that feels both dangerous and clean. That morning, I sat at my desk in the small apartment that overlooked the port, a mug of cold coffee beside my laptop, and I began. My hands did not shake. Every action was deliberate, each form filled with the precision of someone who had rehearsed survival in silence for years. The report for financial exploitation took 30 minutes. I listed names, dates, transactions. I uploaded evidence, the deed scans, the credit statement, the voicemail, the footage. When the system asked for a statement of intent, I wrote only this: to restore ownership and prevent future fraud. I didn't mention humiliation, or blood, or the public applause that still echoed in my head. The truth was simpler and far more powerful. Then I called the bank. The voice on the other end was polite, detached, unaware that she was speaking into the heart of a family unraveling. Yes, Ms. Calder, I see the disputed transfer. It's currently pending reversal. Do you wish to proceed with a fraud report? Yes, I said. And freeze all associated accounts under the Calder family card. She hesitated. Including the primary line? Especially the primary line, I replied. There was a pause, then quiet tapping of keys.
Done, she said. Just like that.
A decade of their entitlement. The grocery deliveries, the hotel stays, the endless charges I once paid without protest stopped breathing in that instant. I thought of my mother's manicured fingers tapping her card at a register, the tiny delay before decline. I imagined the confusion, then the rage, the certainty that it must be some mistake. That disbelief would be their first taste of consequence. Next came the notary, the same man who had stamped their fake agreement, smiling as if formality could absolve forgery. I sent his office a formal report with attached evidence. I didn't accuse, I documented. The distinction mattered. Accusations invite debate. Evidence ends it. By evening, confirmation emails arrived. Bank reversal logged. Fraud report acknowledged. Accounts frozen pending investigation. I read each one like a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, alive. The cottage was safe again. The attempted transfer was void. I stared at the confirmation page for a long moment, then let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the night of the tribute. Justice does not roar. It hums quietly in the background, methodical and sure. I went out onto the small balcony with my phone. Below, the city was settling into its evening rhythm, cafe lights, scooters, a group of teenagers laughing near the harbor. Life moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution happening in my inbox. Their grocery orders declined. It was a small sentence, but it carried years of weight. I pictured the fridge that had always been filled because I had guaranteed the card. I remembered every dismissal when I'd asked for repayment. You earn more, my mother would say, as if success were a sin to be taxed. Now, for the first time, their world would mirror the emptiness they'd carved in others. And Elise, my perfect sister, her turn came next. The sponsor paused her brand deals. A statement appeared online within hours. Due to recent concerns regarding conduct captured on video, collaborations are temporarily suspended. That video, the clip of applause, had found 1 million strangers. Someone had uploaded it anonymously. Maybe the neighbor, maybe a guest. It didn't matter. It spread faster than anyone could control. In 10 seconds, their cruelty had become spectacle. Comment sections filled with disbelief, outrage, pity. People didn't know my name yet, but they knew hers, the influencer who clapped after slap. I didn't post or respond. I didn't need to. Silence, in this case, was louder than any defense. That night, as the headlines multiplied, my phone rang. Private number. I knew it was him before I answered. Rowan Calder, he said, his voice low and hoarse. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I said softly. You're destroying the family, he hissed. The words cracked, part fury, part fear. Do you understand what you've started? The Calders have a name, a reputation. I closed my eyes, remembering the night in Valencia, the garden lights, the applause. No, I said. I'm ending the cover. For a few seconds, there was only breathing on the line, his ragged and heavy, mine, even and calm. Then he hung up. I stared at the dark screen, the reflection of my face faint in the glass. I did not feel victory. What I felt was release, the quiet detachment that comes when truth finally stands on its own legs. Later that evening, I opened my inbox again. The solicitor had written, reversal confirmed. Ownership remains secure. Further investigation pending. I replied with 2 words. Thank you. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and cleansing. I stood by the window and watched it trace paths down the glass. For years, I had been the quiet one, the accommodating daughter, the invisible heir. Now every document, every report, every frozen account was proof that quiet does not mean powerless. They would call it betrayal. They always did when the mirror finally reflected them clearly. But I knew better. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. By nightfall, the city lights shimmered on the wet streets, and my phone lay silent on the table. I didn't expect them to call again. The performance was over. The stage was gone. What remained was truth, unadorned, undeniable, and finally mine. The Caldas had always mistaken compliance for love, silence for loyalty. But I had learned something different. Sometimes the most honest way to love a family is to stop protecting their lies. And so, with the sound of rain against the glass, I let the day end. The reports were filed, the accounts frozen, the truth recorded. I had done what I came to do. Justice, I realized, doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives when the applause dies. It arrived on a pale morning, the envelope thick, embossed, and unmistakable. For a moment, I only stared at it lying on the kitchen counter, its edges catching the early light. No threats this time, no forged signatures, no fine print meant to vanish me from my own story. Just my name, standing alone. Confirmed. I sat with it for a long time before opening it. The paper felt heavy, almost alive. The weight of proof, of reclaiming something that was always mine. I ran my thumb along the seal and thought of the night in Valencia, the slap, the applause, the silence afterward. Every humiliation that had once felt permanent was now reduced to paperwork and consequence. The circle had closed. Outside, the air in Porto smelled faintly of salt and rosemary. The sea was only a few blocks away, its rhythm constant, indifferent. I changed into soft clothes, opened the balcony doors, and brought out a small clay pot. The thyme plant sat ready on the table, roots bound, waiting for a home. I loosened the soil and pressed it down with careful hands. There was something sacred in that gesture, the slow, grounding act of creating life where pain had once lived. The scent rose immediately, bright and sharp. It reminded me of my grandmother, the only Calder woman who had ever known gentleness as strength. She used to say, "Plant herbs wherever you heal. They remember." I wanted the time to remember this, not the betrayal, not the trial, but the calm that followed. When the plant was settled, I sat back and watched the morning unfold. People passed below, a woman carrying bread, a man whistling softly to his dog, a child dragging a stick along the wall. Life moving forward, unconcerned with what had been lost or regained. For the first time in years, I didn't feel observed. I wasn't someone's disappointment or scapegoat or quiet account to exploit. I was just a woman drinking tea on her balcony, breathing freely. Later that afternoon, I logged into my bank account. The balance was stable, secure, mine. I transferred €5,000 into a separate fund, not charity in the public sense, but something quieter. A grant for women rebuilding after control, the ones who had been told that silence was safety, that loyalty meant surrender. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. I didn't need them to know my name. I only wanted the help to reach them the way I once wished something might have reached me. That small act, unannounced, unrecorded, felt like closing the final door. As evening fell, I lit a candle by the window. The scent of thyme and wax drifted through the room. My phone was silent. No calls from Rowan. No messages from Elise. No news stories in which I had to play the villain.
Just stillness.
I thought about what my father had said, that I was destroying the family. He was wrong. The family had destroyed itself long before I stopped pretending. What I ended was the cover, the performance, the endless erasure dressed as love. Now, the only script I followed was my own. A month had passed, and with it, the need for explanation. Healing, I learned, isn't about closure from others. It's about granting yourself permission to stop waiting for it. I kept the cottage. I kept the peace. The rest I returned to sender. And as night folded over Porto, I understood that keeping peace didn't mean quiet anymore. It meant choosing what deserved my silence and what no longer did.